Hey guys, how's it going? It's Al. Now it's time for one of my favorite videos of the year, one of my favorite daily fantasy NFL slates of the year, the Thanksgiving 3-game slate. DraftKings has posted a $1.75 million tournament, the Wishbone Classic, a tradition like no other. $300,000 going to first place, and we're going to go through position by position and try and put together a solid lineup, at least from a first look perspective. I haven't really broken down this slate. There's absolutely no projections out yet. I haven't done any research. It's Monday morning. And the games don't start until Thursday. So obviously we're going to have to take some precautions and have to look at things before the lineups lock. And more importantly than anything else, especially for the tournaments, because Thanksgiving is a great tournament slate every single year. Make sure that you are building your tournament lineups with late swap and leverage in your mind. Set yourself up to be able to swap to players as the day goes on, because the day is broken up into 3 different time slots. Obviously, the first one is Chicago and Detroit. Second one is Buffalo and Dallas. Third one is New Orleans and Atlanta. The first game has the lowest total of all 3. We're expecting the least scoring overall from that game, but that doesn't mean that there aren't good plays in it. You want to be able to align yourself to be able to make swaps, because if you are on the big plays early, you want to be sure that you're setting the rest of your lineups up, because there is plenty of time between each game to take that time and look at your lineups and how much PMR you have left and see if you're blocked. And if you are, you have to pivot off of it. Or if you're not, should you move into a position where you're blocking somebody else? Should you move off of a variance play to go to a chalk play? And leave yourselves those positions to do that. Yes, it's going to mean you're going to have to take some time away from the family that day, if that is the way that you want to play it, and take that extra edge and not leave it on the table. But when you're making those lineups, be sure that you're leaving yourself at least a 2v2 for the late game. If you're building 1, 2, or 3 lineups, just give yourself the maximum amount of flexibility when you're doing it. And be sure that you put your highest priced, latest playing player in the flex spot to give you maximum flexibility to be able to do things if you're only leaving that 1 player remaining to go. So there's some easy spots, some players that we really like on this slate. There's also some very difficult spots in a very difficult position, or one that's kind of lacking, being the tight end position. So why don't we just get right into it and take a look at this slate. Thank you guys for showing up once again. Another Thanksgiving, another video. Drop a like on this one. Be sure that you ring that notification bell after clicking the subscribe button. See, I did it backwards. I'm multi-talented, because I put out a ton of videos throughout the week, every week during the NFL season. I don't want you to miss any of them. Let's get right to the slate. As I said, 3 games: Chicago, Detroit, Buffalo, Dallas, New Orleans, and Atlanta. That first game has a total of 41, and the Bears are favored by 1, so at least expected to be a close game. And at least there's not a lot of places that everything can go. You know what? We're going to do it a little bit differently. Let's go game by game on this one. So the quarterbacks in this game: Jeff Driscoll. He's been not bad. His rushing ability at least gives you some rush touchdown upside there, with 9 and 8 rushes the last 2 weeks, 63 yards, 51 yards. He is not going to throw usually for 300 yards, and probably isn't going to do that against the Chicago defense. But if he can get himself into the end zone, obviously that gives you a position where you can pay down a little bit. But where he's priced versus other quarterbacks on this slate, I don't know that we get that much of an edge for rostering him instead of, or in the stead of, not instead of, Matthew Stafford. Trubisky, against a better matchup defense, is lower priced by 200. He's ugly. It's not pretty, guys. It really isn't. But he does have a couple of guys that you can pair him up with. There is stackability here. You can bring it back with somebody else on Detroit if that's the way that you want to go. As well, the running backs, we know that TARIK Cohen and David Montgomery, that this is one of the best matchups. Detroit has given up the most points on DraftKings to opposing running backs this season. But the problem is David Montgomery has not separated himself as an actual good NFL back yet, even though his skill set would allude to the fact that he should be. Maybe the matchup overrides what his talent has been able to do for him, because I believe that he's a very talented running back, but I just haven't seen him do it so far this year, at least not on a consistent basis. His big game was the 2-touchdown game against Philly in week 9, and the game against the Chargers, where he thought he had turned the corner in that 2 weeks, but he was very touchdown reliant with 3 touchdowns across those 2 games. And if he's not getting into the end zone, he's just not paying off. But he could against this really bad defense. TARIK Cohen is the big play guy. We've seen him get at least consistent usage in the passing game and consistent fantasy points with 12, 18, and 13 the last 3 weeks. I prefer him to Montgomery here on the Thanksgiving slate because of the fact that I am focusing mostly on tournaments here, and he is the higher upside play without touchdowns. He can get you there with receiving yards. He definitely has big playability, and if he finds himself into the end zone, extra added bonus there against a team that is ill-equipped to stop somebody like TARIK Cohen. Bo Scarborough had 18 carries last week, had 14 carries the week before. As I said on the recap video, which isn't out yet, it'll be out on Tuesday. So if you haven't watched that one for the week 12 recap, go look at it. Bo Scarborough is essentially this generation's LeGarrette Blount in terms of fantasy. He's going to get the ball a ton. If you believe that Detroit is going to be playing from ahead in this game, and you believe that Detroit is going to get multiple opportunities inside the 5 in this game, then Bo Scarborough represents a very viable value play for you. If you think that they're going to be playing from behind, then he's not the guy that I want to roster. But you have to think about ranges. You have to think about possibilities and game script possibilities and game flow possibilities. And in any of those game scripts and game flows, there's a possibility that Detroit could get up 10 points. And if they are up 10 points in the second half, Bo Scarborough is going to get himself 15 to 22 carries on the ground, and if they have touchdowns, if they have opportunities inside the 5, they are going to hand the ball off to Bo Scarborough. So he is a very touchdown dependent, no help in the passing game back, but he is priced accordingly, very much like a LeGarrette Blount. In the passing game, Allen Robinson, probably my favorite play in this game in the pass, at least of the receivers, of the pass catchers here. We do have big playability. We do have end zone ability and red zone usage from Allen Robinson. He's been outstanding this year, even with inconsistent quarterback play. You can play him without stacking with Mitch Trubisky. Galladay and Jones are kind of a toss-up. Obviously, I'd rather have Stafford at quarterback if I'm going to play either one of these guys. Jones has found himself into the end zone a couple of times in week 11, but because of the fact that they're not throwing it as much, and definitely less consistently, and probably capping around 200 or 210 passing yards, the upside for somebody like Marvin Jones or the upside for somebody like Kenny Galladay is a little bit more capped. Taylor Gabriel found himself into the end zone, but his targets are inconsistent and fluctuate every single week, and he's priced higher than somebody like Anthony Miller, who I think is the best value wide receiver play on this slate that's in the sub 4K, sub 4,500 range. So I'm going to plug him in first. I'm also going to plug in Allen Robinson from this game. Those are the 2 plays that I want from here, and we're going to move on to the next game, Buffalo and Dallas. This is a weird game to me because Buffalo is an extremely good defense. We know that. They can be exploited, and the Bears have the second highest team total of the 6 games on this, or the 6 teams on this slate. Josh Allen can be a slate breaker. We have only seen that from him once. Or a GPP winning type quarterback. We saw it multiple times last season. We haven't seen it yet this season except for week 11 against Miami, but everybody's a GPP winning quarterback when they play Miami, or at least it seems such. He's basically centered around 19 or 20 points in most of the games that he's played. If this game plays out the way that Vegas believe it plays out, they're going to have to throw to be effective, and they can attack. So I don't mind him as a tournament quarterback. There's only 2 guys that you're going to want to pair him with if you're pairing him and stacking him. It's John Brown is number 1. Cole Beasley would be number 2 in a revenge game sort of a situation. If you believe in the King of Dust in a revenge game spot here against Dallas, he had a big game last week in week 12 with 19.6 DraftKings points. He's had touchdowns in 4 of the last 6 games. But like the production just isn't there, right? It's not steady production. You can very easily get a 4 or 5 point game out of Cole Beasley, where you're not really getting that out of John Brown. So in my tournament lineups that I've been building recently, if I've got quarterback with, if I'm having the Daily Roto lineup builder build me lineups with Allen at quarterback, I'm stacking him with exactly 1 John Brown in every single one of these lineups. So all of my John Brown lineup, or sorry, all of my Josh Allen lineups will probably have John Brown, but on a 3-game slate, I'm going to widen that because of the range of outcomes and because of the fact that variance comes more into play on a shorter slate than on a larger slate. So I will probably have some Beasley in those stacks, if not a double stack with Brown and Beasley. But for this lineup, I do want to have John Brown. As I said, tight end is kind of just a wasteland this week. Like, okay, let's look at every tight end just for short. Austin Hooper's questionable. If he plays, I think that he is in play this week, and he's somebody that I'm going to want to have a lot of shares of based on the just absolute lack of talent on this particular slate for tight ends. Jared Cook, the other tight end that I probably want to have an awful lot of shares of because of the absolute lack of talent at tight end. Hawkinson, dust. Witten, okay, Witten's fine, I guess, when you take him in consideration on this slate of tight ends, but matchup against Buffalo, which is absolute death for tight ends, dust. Jaden Graham, he's not a thing yet, guys. I know that a lot of people on Daily Fantasy Twitter want him to be a thing. He's just not a thing yet. If Hooper's out, I'm sure he's going to get rostered, but you're looking at the very much possibility of 2 or 3 targets from basically every one of these guys. From Hawkinson, 2 targets possible. Witten, 2 or 3 targets possible. Graham, 2-3 targets possible. Blake Jarwin, same thing. Thomas, same thing, 2-3 targets possible. Dawson Knox, going to be popular, 2-3 targets possible. Every one of these guys, BRAUNECKER, same thing, 2-3 targets possible. All these sorts of guys, every one of them from Hawkinson down is essentially the same guy. The only 2 that have some sort of projectable or predictable upside are Jared Cook and Austin Hooper. I'm hoping that Austin Hooper plays and is given complete clearance to go full in this game, but I'm not there yet with him, so I don't know what to tell you at tight end. Getting back to this game. We do want to play quarterbacks that have rushing upside. We do want to play quarterbacks that are good. We want to play them in great matchups, but we also want to focus on ones that have high team totals. And every box except for that great matchup gets checked here with Dak Prescott. Now, if Amari Cooper can break loose from the coverage that he's going to get this week, one of the toughest cover corners in the league plays for Buffalo and is going to shadow Amari Cooper around the field. If he can break free for 1, possibly 2, then great. But Dak Prescott's going to be my quarterback, at least for this first look. Looking at running backs, kind of want both running backs in this game. Devin Singletary has taken over the job in Buffalo, getting consistent volume and consistent usage. We know that he can catch passes. If they play from behind, he's going to be game flow independent and be the guy that catches balls. They're going to try and run it with him. He's getting enough usage in the red zone and inside the 5. And 5,800 is just too cheap, especially on this slate. Ezekiel Elliott, to me, it's going to come down to whether we want Ezekiel Elliott or Alvin Kamara if we're going to pay up. Kamara's had much better usage in the passing game. Ezekiel Elliott has a much better path to getting 25 touches than does Alvin Kamara, who can disappear in large stretches of games, as he did in week 12 when everybody was tilting their faces off until that final drive, when he kind of made his day somewhat respectable, although even still not getting to a point where he paid off his salary or reached value. So Ezekiel Elliott, I think, is in the lead, but we're going to leave him, leave that spot for later, and then kind of move on to the next game. So New Orleans against Atlanta in the highest totaled game of the year. Drew Brees really put up a terrible game against Atlanta the first time that they played in New Orleans. Now this game's in Atlanta. I think that they're going to make some adjustments. We saw Atlanta give up a ton of yards to Jameis Winston last week. It could just be a blip on the radar of what this defense did the 2 weeks following their bye, where they had 5 sacks and 6 sacks. Last week against Tampa Bay, no sacks. So maybe this was just a blip and an anomaly, this little 2-week stretch here, because they're back to being the team that does not get any pressure on opposing quarterbacks. And if you're not going to get pressure on Drew Brees, he's going to do some really nasty things to your offense. As I said, Alvin Kamara, over the last 5 weeks, has had a ridiculous amount of targets. 44 targets for a running back over the past 5 games is tremendous. His volume in the running game is just never going to be there. That's just not how they utilize him. It's not how they utilized him last year. Everybody said, well, Mark Ingram's gone now, so great. They replaced him with a player that's very similar to Mark Ingram in Latavius Murray, and Latavius Murray has stepped into that role admirably. So Alvin Kamara is what he is. We are going to expect 7 to 10 targets out of him in this game, which is extremely valuable. But at 8,100 versus 7,400 for Zeke, I don't know that that's the route that I want to go. So I'm going to plug Zeke and take the savings there and move on to the rest of this game. Jared Cook, as I said, is probably at the point of right now on Monday when I'm recording this, the only tight end that's viable on this slate, considering that Austin Hooper still doesn't have the green light for Thursday. And every other tight end does not project for over 3 targets. So I'm just going to plug Jared Cook into here and I'm just going to deal with it. I'm totally fine doing that. It just kind of is what it is. He's the guy that you kind of have to have in this lineup. The other wide receivers, Michael Thomas, if you can find a way to squeeze him in, and there's going to be ways that I'm going to try and find to squeeze him in, whether it's going to be through game stacks, whether it's going to be taking on one extra value play, or punting that high-priced running back to be able to afford Michael Thomas. He is the highest floor player on this slate and has an equal ceiling to just about anybody else. He's been an absolute ridiculous player this year. He's running back status in terms of consistency. Even though he only gets 9 to 12 touches a game, they're really, 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 really consistent in getting him the ball, as well as in the end zone and in the red zone. End zone targets and red zone targets are tremendous with Michael Thomas, and very easily convertible catches with his almost historic level of catch percentage on his targets to catches. Over 80%, absolutely absurd. 100 yards is in play every single week. He's on pace to break the catch record. I don't know that I can squeeze him into this first look lineup, but I'm definitely going to have shares. Julio Jones is left last game with an injury. He always seems that he's a little bit injured, but left last game with a new injury to his shoulder. We're going to have to monitor this as the week goes on. Russ Gage has been pretty good recently with 10 more targets. We got a little flop lag here. We all wanted to play him against Carolina, and we kind of got off that train against Tampa Bay when he went up to 3,900, but had a great game. Was actually the best sub 4K wide receiver, one of them. Him and I think Miller were also pretty good last week with 10 targets. If you want to go there for value, fine, especially in the absence of Julio Jones, fine. But for me, I'm going to take Calvin Ridley coming off of consistent usage and then a big usage game yesterday as that game got out of hand and they had to throw the ball a ton more. I'm expecting a little bit more consistency and efficiency from Matt Ryan in week 13 versus week 12. So give me Calvin Ridley, and that leaves me 2,800 for a defense. We're going to plug in the Bears D because they just kind of fit. I've got 300 left over. We could afford the Lions if we want, but I've got a couple of Bears in this lineup. So there's my Thanksgiving first look. Let me know what you guys would do differently in the comments down below. I hope that you have yourselves a very good Thanksgiving. Spend some time with family. Try to keep the conversations as civil as possible. Do what you can. Make it a fun holiday. Don't listen to Adam Levitan's food takes. And until the next video, I'll catch up to you guys later. Bye.
He's a legend.